We're just going to show you how to do a simple gather today. We're using 2 lines of stitching that have been pulled through. So there is a few different methods you can do to create gathers, but this is one of the simplest, most beginner-friendly ways. So we're going to start with our fabric. Now I know that my seam that needs to be gathered is just along the top here. So what we're going to do is create 2 lines of parallel stitching using a long stitch. So set your stitch length to about 4 or your maximum you can do on your machine, and you will start here. If your seam allowance when you come to finish your garment is going to be 1 centimetre, then you want 1 line of stitching that's within that seam allowance and the other line of stitching that is just beyond that. That way when you sew your pieces together, your final stitch will go in between and you can remove your gathering stitches after that. So we are going to do 1 line of stitching that is about 7 or 8 mil in, and then another that is about 12 or 13 mil. And we're going to leave very long tails. So we'll move over to the sewing machine. So I'm making sure that I have fairly long tails to start with and just pulling them behind. I know that if I line up the edge of my fabric with the edge of my presser foot, then that's going to give me about 7 or 8 mil. And we're doing absolutely no back stitching here. So we're just stitching all the way down, trying to keep this as even as possible, but these stitches are going to come out eventually. And when we get to the end, we are also not back stitching. We are going to pull our tails long and make sure that they're a good way away from the fabric. And then we're going to line up another line of stitching. So I'm just going to try and get that kind of 5 or 6 millimeters apart from each other. And then we're just going to do that same thing, keeping that stitch line parallel. Okay, and we're keeping our tails long, and then we're going to move over to the mat. To create the gathers, now what we're going to do is I'm going to use a pin. We're going to flip over to the wrong side of our work, make sure we're just holding those bobbin threads. And you can do that from either end. I sometimes like to do a bit of gathering from both ends of the fabric so that I can evenly space out my gathers. So we're just going to hold our bobbin threads taut, and we're going to just push the fabric down along that, smoothing it out as we go. And don't worry to begin with about getting your gathers even. The first thing is you want to just basically gather up your fabric. So then I might do the same thing from the opposite side. I'm always going for my bobbin threads, my 2 bobbin threads here, and I'm just lightly pulling the threads while pushing the fabric down those lines of stitching, and that creates a row of gathers. Once you get to this point, you might be attaching it to something else. You need to kind of make sure that the pattern piece is the right size. And you can see there's a bit sparse gathers here, but there's very tight gathers here. So we might just ease those out. And at the end, you can always put a pin through these lines of stitching, and it will kind of stop it from coming out. I just tend to attach it to a bit of fabric or detach it to the seam that it needs to be sewn to, and then adjust my gathers as I go. But it's really easy to manipulate, but you can even, if you realise you've done something wrong, you can pull all of these gathers back out again, and you can start again. Just make sure you're always coming from the reverse side and using your bobbin threads to gather up your fabric, and then you end up with a nice gathered piece of fabric here, ready to be attached.